So throughout the 1800s, the Maratha Empire will begin to decline, as all empires will eventually do. Its resources will be stretched thin over a vast portion of the subcontinent, and rival groups will likely begin to weaken the structure of the government. However, during this time, it will see industrialization as the key to becoming a viable modern power, and engage in heavy industrialization, albeit near the end of the century. Perhaps it will see weak neighboring China as an example of what happens to backward countries and industrialize to prevent the same. In our timeline, India did industrialize not long after Europe did, but it had to work for the benefit of the British Empire. Without India as part of its empire, Britain would be greatly weakened. It would still have many lands, and the sun would never set on its empire, but it would not have the vast labor force nor resources provided by India. India was considered the crown jewel of the empire, and rightly so. Another major event of the 1800s that would not have taken place is the Opium Wars. In our timeline, India served as a base for funneling opium towards China, where it was outlawed. However, in an independent India, the British could not do so, and the opium crisis with China would be averted. The Maratha Empire may be a key ally of China, as by already resisting European influence, it could help China to do the same. Instead of being dominated by Europeans, China may grow into a viable power of its own in this timeline. However, the Marathas could also take advantage of China's weaknesses and take control over some parts of the country. This is actually unlikely due to the open door policy. Past this time, it is hard to predict the future of the nation. The further we get from the point of divergence, the murkier the scenario becomes. After the weakening and eventual fragmentation of the Maratha Empire, if a figure like Otto von Bismarck in Prussia arose, much of India might be brought under a single strong government. Perhaps someone would take heed of how Bismarck effectively unified the German states through blood, iron, and sweat, and attempt to do the same in India. In this timeline, figures such as Gandhi might fight to unify India rather than fighting for its independence. However, in the case of India, it will be much harder to unify the entire nation. The population will be much larger, and the groups present will be much more diverse in the case of Prussia. Also, the nations will be likely need some incentive to unify, presumably a military threat. The dozens of small states of India, potentially existing under weakened forms of the Maratha Empire, will likely stay out of World War I. They will see it as a distant European conflict and not relevant to their concerns. Also, especially after the dissolvement of the Ottoman Empire, after the conflict, the Maratha Empire will begin to worry about its own demise and regress back into an isolationist state. Then, World War II would break out, although this will be radically different than in our timeline. The Japanese, who would likely take advantage of the weakened state of the Maratha Empire, would sweep into the subcontinent. In our timeline, the Japanese did fight in India, namely in the Battle of Imphal. However, an allied force was necessary to drive them back. Without a strong power, it is likely that the Japanese could push into India, thus extending their territory and prolonging the war. Also adding to the chaos would be states that supported the Axis powers. In our timeline, a strong movement under S.C. Bose and the Indian National Army supported the Japanese. This would mean that some Indians would actually aid and side with the Japanese, and could even turn the tide of the war to their favor. A deadly civil war could take place between the opposing sides, and it is likely that the victor would extend its rule over the subcontinent. If America and the Allies won, the regions supporting the Axis powers would come under Allied control. Perhaps the Soviet will make sure to take India first and incorporate it into their territory or sphere of influence. In this scenario, India will be split between the Soviet and the US and become a battleground for a Cold War. India never develops nuclear weapons, as its occupiers already possessed them. After the Cold War, we would see freedom return to India, with the Soviet-controlled portion poorer than the US-led area, like in Germany today. By 1991, there was about a dozen medium-sized states in India. Someone would recognize the potential economic power of a combined large state and attempt to create one economic unit. We could see a form of the European Union, except more centralized. How loose or strong this confederation would be is up to your debate. Also, unlike the India of today, this confederation would spread across the entire subcontinent, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and possibly Myanmar, which is part of British India. In the modern age, India would likely be a confederation of up to a dozen states, each with strong cultural identities. No one would think of himself as Indian, but as a member of their nation state. There will be no national language, and as today, there will be numerous local dialects and languages. As a whole, the subcontinent will be a greater industrial power than today, having to industrialize by itself to remain a viable power in the modern world. Also, without British exploitation, the Confederation will be also better off financially.